I'm Ananya Prasad, and in 2024 I'll be rowing solo across the Atlantic Ocean as part of the world's toughest row. So one of the reasons I signed up to row across the ocean was that so far there hasn't been a woman of colour to row any ocean solo, and it did strike me that despite a lot of advances in representation and diversity in the outdoors, that this was a milestone that hadn't been achieved before. There previously wasn't enough representation for young girls, especially when I was growing up. It wasn't common to see women who looked like me in adventure sports, which is why I think representation is so important. I think humans are very visual creatures. I think you have to see people who look like you or are from the same background or are from the same ethnicity or perhaps have a disability like you. If we see people like that doing different things, it makes it less intimidating, I think, for other people to venture into that same space. Some of the things I have to look forward to are 20-foot plus waves, sleep deprivation, and definitely the solitude, the nearest person being on a space station. For me, I think what was more daunting than the idea of being in the middle of the Atlantic on my own was committing to it and telling other people that I'm going to do this thing which is quite different and out there, not really knowing if anyone would believe in it or understand why I was doing it. I think in terms of my fears for the row, it's certainly something that anyone has to overcome doing these kinds of things, I think, is fear of failure and self-doubt. And that very act of giving it a go anyway, I think, takes a lot of courage, and that should be celebrated rather than just the act itself of achieving something. My parents are definitely a source of inspiration to me in difficult times. My parents and I are both first-generation immigrants, so we moved to the UK from India when I was 5 years old, and they worked for the NHS, and growing up I would see them having to do more medical qualifications and degrees, so studying as well as doing night shifts with a 5-year-old, which I think, especially in those times, moving to a new continent where they didn't know anyone, took a lot of courage and more than they're willing to give themselves credit for, I think. So despite having signed up to row across the Atlantic solo, I think people might be surprised to know I'm not great with deep water. So that's definitely something to overcome, I think, for the next year in my preparations. Being afraid of something is never a reason to not do anything. You can't necessarily control everything around you, and you have to accept that the weather may change or a route may change, but I think that's all part of the journey, and I think my life in other aspects would be better for that. The message that I would want to send out to my younger self or young women of colour is that you don't have to do things that have been done because that's what it's expected of you, and it's okay to forge your own path in whatever you're doing, whether it's your career, your hobbies, your aspirations, and not be afraid to fail. I think that's fundamental to pushing barriers, is that we're too afraid to make mistakes and too afraid of judgment and self-judgment. And if we let go of that fear of failure or that things could go wrong and accept that that's a part of life and we learn from it, I think it makes it so much easier to do things that we don't always feel comfortable with or might be new to us. What it means to be courageous is to accept failure as an option and not be afraid of it, to embrace it and what you learn from it, and do it anyway.